which are marine plants, don't have a root system. So they have to attach onto a substrate so that they can do what they want to do. Otherwise they don't have to worry about roots and nutrients in the soil. The problem is sometimes they attach onto rock which is movable itself, so they will lose out. It's a rock that has been washed in the last sea, and the algae will die because it's not where it should be, which is way out there where all that other stuff is. It's a very good example of the problem in having a holdfast that's very good holding on.
The normal habitat for Hormosira that we were just looking at, it's otherwise known as Neptune's necklace, is out there on the rock platform, and you can see all that yellow colour on there, which is very prominent during the summer months. In the winter there's much less of it, it changes quite dramatically. But it's in the zone of the upper limit of the tide, and it's pretty well dominant at that point. As you go out a little bit deeper below the tide level, Hormosira gives way to some brown algae, and as you come up higher, it's just too dry and not wet frequently enough for it to continue to live. Occasionally some of the plants will live just at the top of the range, and in a very hot day in summer they get badly burnt and can even die. Yeah, you're right, yeah. Oh, did you get that lot? Still running?
The way Hormosira ends up at the end of each year.
No, this is where the Hormosira ends up when it's finished its life and it's been washed off the rocks, burnt by the sun, piled up at the high tide mark by the waves. It's now just accumulating and decaying slowly. Something will come along and eat it, but it can't live any longer. It'll still remain photosynthesizing for a short while with all the yellowy brown ones, but the black ones are dead. They're absolutely dried out, and they've probably been burnt when they were still attached. Oh, there's another example of the Hormosira on one of these loose rocks, and this time it's actually sitting just too high in the landscape to continue to survive. Oh, all these poor guys here are sunburnt. They didn't go through the slip, slap, plop routine. Okay.
See, we have all these little gastropods here. This is a thing called Marula marginalba, or the mulberry whelk. It looks like a mulberry in a way. These are little insignificant looking gastropod mollusks, but they're very active carnivores, and they, in my opinion, are one of the major controllers of what you find on a rock platform. They eat, say, the oysters. They come in and eat all the oysters. Something takes the place of the oysters. It might be barnacles, it might be limpets, it might be something else. They also eat limpets, they also eat barnacles. So it's continuing, but then the algae comes in, and the algae, they don't like algae, so they disappear, but something else comes in to eat the algae. That might be limpets. So they come in again to eat the limpets. So it's a continuous story over this whole rock platform. It's a dynamic system, changing all the time. This year oysters, next year barnacles, next year something else. All because of this little gastropod. Well, not all, but mostly because of this little gastropod. So small and insignificant, but a major controller of what we find. What do you think, Peter?
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with that. There is a concept called a keystone species, and it could be that this is a keystone species for shore platforms because of its grazing, its eating habits and chewing up all of these other things and getting rid of them, moving them on and keeping the cycle going. The concept's a little bit woolly. It's sort of human thinking imposed on the reality of the ecology, but nevertheless it's a useful one to keep in the back of your mind.
One of the benefits to us in the world is that algae, over the whole of the planet, the algae generate much of the oxygen that we breathe. These plants, if I touch them, little bubbles will appear, and that's all oxygen. Now if I come back in 10 minutes and do that again, there'll be another little mass of bubbles coming out. See here? Now that's not bubbles that are just left over from the last tide that's washed in. This is constantly being generated because these plants are photosynthesizing and producing oxygen while they're doing that. So It's been estimated that the algae in the world, the macroalgae, the ones we can see here, and the microalgae, or the phytoplankton, that occur in their billions and billions and billions on the surface of the waters of the sea all over the world. They leave the surface where the sun is, they're generating oxygen, and they all together, the algae produce, it's estimated about 65% of the oxygen that you and I breathe comes from the algae in the world. These are brittle stars. They're starfish. They always have 5 arms, and they're called brittle because they are. They'll very easily lose their arm, but they're very good at generating more arms to take their place. So they're quite harmless. They feed on detrital matter. In the tropics, sometimes you'll find these species, they're upside down and they're feeding on the scum on the surface of the water. They're picking up all the microalgae and stuff that are floating around on the surface of the water. I don't seem to find them around here doing that. Now, if we look carefully at this whole rock, there's a lot of other things. These are different sort of starfish. These are little, they'll always have different numbers of arms. There's a whole swag of them there, and they can divide in two sometimes, and each side go off and start living again. These are chitons. They're shellfish that have 8 little shells, sometimes surrounded by a big mantle, as we call it. Like this one here is lots of shell and a very small mantle, or girdle, mantle. So there are many different species of these chitin shells. These are little tracks of worms, little bits of sponge, all sorts of things under the rock. Now if I leave this rock turned over, in 5 minutes a lot of this stuff will die because it doesn't like the sun. So I'll turn it back. There's a good example of bioerosion.
Oh, that's a nice example. Very good. How long did it take you to drill that out, Phil?
Probably a number of generations. The sea ocean is slowly carving its little hole in which it sits, and then it'll probably die and another one.
The chitons are actually
Sorry?
in the hole. The chitons are in the hole.
Yeah.
So he's not actively doing it, he's just occupying.
I think that's most of the case. I think it's just accidental that they're not deliberately making themselves a hole. I'll have a look down here because this other rock. There's another one there. There's another one.
And a bubba. One down the backside as well.
Now this specimen is probably occupying a hole that was made by something, another one earlier, and it's slowly getting bigger and bigger. You see there's another one here again, nicely fitting into the hole. So they're good examples of.
It's extraordinary, that the precision of that joint, those joint lines.
Oh, that's very classic.
It's called a bioerosion as distinct from geoerosion, which is what we saw up there on the rock platform, on the cliff face. This is biologically made slowly wearing these rocks away with biological action. Yes, you don't often see those.
We picked this guy out of his little cubby hole and he's got a chitin or so living underneath. That's the bottom side there.
Oh, it's such a neat egg cup shape, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a beautiful shape. Fits the animal perfectly. In fact, there's 3 chitins. A big fella living on top of 2 others and saying, "What the hell's going on?" Okay, these urchins will burrow right through the rock at times, and many generations of urchins are required to drill a hole, but if we get down in here, where they've been working away, we'll probably find some more cavities. There's one, for example, but it's empty, and there's the remains of another one down there. And in time, they will work in a couple of faces here, and go right through this little pinnacle of rock, which is in situ bedrock, wear it all the way, and it'll break up and drift up on the beach. There's a couple more urchins down the end, more or less free living. Even up on the dry part of the platform here at the moment, in the sun, the algae that's growing on this surface has actually started to lift and curl, and because it's adhering to this rock, which is a relatively fine-grained lithic sandstone, as it curls back it's peeling off a layer of sand grains. Over time the rock wears down, and so the algae at this point is actually sort of smoothing out the surface. Then something will come along and graze it, a limpet maybe, I've got 1 or 2 of them in there, and it'll eat the algae, and it'll also eat another grain layer of sand off the top of the rock. Slowly, slowly it all disappears.
Yep. So here's a bit of algae. It looks like there's nothing on it, but I touch it, all those little bubbles come out. It's all oxygen that's been generated through the photosynthesis. And come back in 5 or 10 minutes and do it again, so a lot more bubbles. Now this is a very, very good example of what we call a true nudibranch. Nudibranch meaning naked gilled animal. The front of the animal is here. The 2 what we call rhinophores, their sensory organs at this end, and then go along right at the other end you've got the plumose feathery gills, and that's where the word naked gill comes from. I touch them and they will retract into the body of the animal. It'll take a little while to come out again. I don't know what that species is. In fact, I haven't seen this one here before, but it's just one of many nudibranchs that we find on Long Reef. Nearly all algal feeders, but some of them are carnivores, quite active carnivores. Some of them feed specifically on egg masses and other things. There are nudibranchs or sea slugs to fit every niche that you want.